Well, welcome to our weekly Q&A webinar. This is Dion McCormick. Our fine associate Dave McCormick will not be with us this week. He's sorely missed. He's got some well-deserved time with he and his family. I want to say thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We have a real fun presentation today, a little bit more background information in the DevOps area, and so I hope you'll find it interesting. As always, our goal is to help you. So do us a favor, if you have any questions, please put them in the questions area of the GoToWebinar questions area. I will be checking them this time, and I'll keep an eye on those, and we'll try and cover those as we go through it. And as always, you can always send questions to guides, that's G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com beforehand, and we can cover them through our presentation during here, or prepare special demos and other things to help support you. But again, thank you so much. I want to do a couple quick things real quick. First, I wanted to remind everybody, man, we're in October. It is fun. And actually in Texas, it's actually gotten a little cooler, so we're pretty excited about having some cooler weather here. But as you know, later this month is our Alpha DevCon. Please take the time. We'd love to have you join us. If you haven't already signed up, you can go to Alpha Software and search on DevCon 2017. We're putting the final touches on the training and training environment. I think you're really going to be excited about that training. One of the cool things what we're doing this year, which is very neat, is we have two areas for training. We have two tracks, one that's going to be about mobile app development for, again, beginners, people who are starting, but we also have a second track who's being done by Chris, my esteemed colleague, which will be talking about developing and debugging with PhoneGap. And then the next day we're going to go into Alpha Launch and Alpha Cloud. Very exciting stuff. I think you're going to find it very valuable, and you'll come away with really good information. And there's still time, so you can go to the to Alpha Software, go to the DevCon and sign up for it there. It is going to be a great event, and we do appreciate everybody who's already signed up. We can't wait to see you at the event and catch up. Also, just let you know, joining us today, as usual, is Sarah Mitchell. Sarah is the leader of our documentation site. She's going to help me out today, kind of keep an eye on the questions, also provide any other supporting information we have. So, Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Okay, so last week we started a new series, and the new series was called the DevOps series for developers, developer operations, and it is focused on the fact that as a developer, especially small, you're kind of like the classic, small business owner. You not only generate the code and develop it, but you test it, you deploy it, you support it, and the other pieces there. And there's a term that's been used and has become very adopted in the industry called DevOps, which talks about developer operations. And it really encompasses all of the different elements that go into a basically a system or a process that you can use to develop and deliver and enhance solutions to the field. So Alpha Anywhere is obviously a key component of that capabilities, and so what we decided to do was spend some more time talking about not only how to develop specific capabilities within Alpha, what are the features, the other things that are associated with it, but beyond that we are also talking about how to manage that process and what are the best practices, the best tools, and the other pieces that we can do that. Now, last week we focused on the process and environment, specifically setting up an environment where you can have a validation in a production or test environments. You can set those up, configure it, and therefore you can be supporting your production people at the same time as you're making changes to the system and deploying those and doing testing and the other pieces here. So the idea behind this is that what you want to do is first look at your environment and set up an environment that will allow you to support production without disruption, but also allow you to quickly update, change, and modify the pieces that go into it. So last week we focused really about how to set up those two environments, how to then set up your publishing profiles, your configurations, the other pieces along with that. And actually I just saw we got a message from a gentleman, Warren. Thank you very much, Warren. How do I get a copy of last week's webinar? you can go on to Alpha Anywhere. Let's go to alphasoftware.com. And let's go to Alpha Software. And you can go to resources. And we have our video library, and we post them to the video library. I haven't checked. It should be in here in our videos. We put our weekly Q&A into the videos area, and this is taking a moment to update. You'll see in a moment, but you can search it on there. If not, then I'll double check with the team, and we'll make sure we get a copy up of there as soon as possible. You can always email us at guides@Alpha Software, and we'll make sure to notify you when we post those up to the server. So that was talking about last week, and now we're going to dive into a second area. Let me scoot down here. And that is in the area of source control. And what I'm going to talk about is how do you use source control with Alpha to then make your developer operations environment as efficient as possible. But before I do that, I want to kind of walk through and just make sure, especially for people who weren't able to attend last week, what does DevOps mean? So the idea behind it is that you have a continuous process, and that's why we have this figure 8. And I borrowed this, I love this graphic, but it really explains the pieces there, that allow you to plan, code, which is really Alpha Anywhere, which along with build. Alpha Anywhere technically doesn't have a build process, so it's kind of all in one because we simplify life for our developers. But then test, release, then we actually deploy it to the field, operate, and monitor. And therefore you're looping back into it as your users are using it out in the field. Then you're monitoring that behaviors, and then you're putting that into the next round, and you can continually improve your environment. And making this one continuous process that is managed, that is structured, will go a long way for you to become more responsive and allow you to develop more things more quickly for your users. You can efficiently watch what's going on with your application, detect problems before they start happening, understand how people are using your system, and then feed that into a planning process that will allow you to adjust a code to out. And we spend most of our time in the webinar on this piece because that's really the Alpha Anywhere piece, but we really wanted to take it up a level and talk about it there. So the one thing that's very important about this process is managing the code that you're developing, i.e. that Alpha really is, you're developing a set of files when it's all said and done. It's Alpha is a file-based system, and those files are what really make up your application. Obviously your data model and your database, that's a key part of it there. So one of the key things about the overall developer operations is one is, especially in a multi-developer environment, how do you manage those files? How do you make sure that those files are always the correct ones? How do you make sure that those are preserved so in case you ever have a problem, you can go back and get that information and be able to quickly restore? How do you handle situations where maybe you're working on a big update and you've kind of released an existing solution out to the field, and meanwhile you have the new big version and you're starting to already code and build that big new version, and there's a lot of changes to it, but then all of a sudden a very critical issue is detected while you're in operation. Well, you know, if you haven't set up a proper source control strategy, excuse me, how do you kind of go and grab the files that are currently out in the field, make those tweaks, adjust them, and be able to handle that? And that's where source control can come in and become your greatest friend, because it allows you to make it simple to handle those kind of scenarios and simple to handle multiple people working with one time on the solution at one time. And we're seeing that as we get more and more enterprise customers, as our applications become larger with mobile and desktop web, we're finding out that people are having multiple people working on it at one time. They have teams of developers instead of a single developer. And so in order to handle that, you need a effective strategy. So today we're going to talk about source control. What is it? I'm sure, and I apologize deeply for a lot of our esteemed colleagues that are already on the line, that you may already have mastery of source control, but there are other individual developers who won't. So I'm going to kind of go through some basics, but then talk about some examples of how we do it today. But how do you control your source, i.e. your files that make up your system? So the key is, how do you manage this to do two things? One is enhance productivity, to move faster, to control things, to have less errors of putting a wrong file out on a server or making a wrong release, but also enabling teamwork, which is really critical. So I'm going to put this little, I love this little cartoon here, but the idea behind it is that source control at a certain amount of time can seem fairly overwhelming, especially when you go online, you see a whole bunch of command line stuff, etc. But the idea is it's not that bad. And in fact, I'm going to talk about some of the nice tools that you can use to make your life easier and make it much easier to start using source control and be able to handle it. But really, the core of is we're going to go through a high-level view of what source control is, talk a little bit about distributed source control, talk about a repository concept, but also talk about something very important, which is called branching. And here are some basic source control concepts that we're going to couple on there. So first, one thing we want to talk about is that what's called distributed source control. So modern source control systems. Well, at first, let me take a step back. What is source control? Well, source control is a way for you to manage and track the files that make up your solution. So if I'm in alpha here and I go into the folder for my application here, you're going to see that it's made up of a whole bunch of files. Some of them are things like component files. Other things are report files. There's also secondary files in here called, I call them junk files, but there are things like manifests and things like that. The important thing is that you have this very valuable set of files where you have adjusted and included them. You basically need to control these files, and therefore you need a method to be able to back them up, store them, save them, and then also share them effectively with other people. And so very important is that Alpha is a file-based system, and source control is built around file-based system. So, you know, the traditional idea is you had one folder, one location that everything got put into. Well, the problem with that methodology is that everybody had to kind of be in sync on that one folder, and it didn't give very much flexibility. And the other is that it required that you have an online connection into that. Well, modern source control has what's called distributed source control, where now what you do is each person that's using it has their own little local database of file information. And so they have their own little what's called a repository, which has this folder and this file information in it. And then when they're working on their local repository. But then what's neat is that there will be a central repository, and everybody will connect to that central repository, which allow people to then share and coordinate that file. So I can be off here making modifications, changing, do what I need to do. Another person can be doing that at the same exact time, and then there's a method to check it into a central file repository where then everybody can get access to it. And this provides you the ability to quickly break down your solution, but still provide a huge amount of flexibility, meaning I can be just doing my stuff locally, and when I'm ready to go, I can check it in or push it into the central repository, and then this person out here, when they're ready, can pull that information down and do it. And there's a lot of really important rules that are associated with that to make sure that people have the most common updates and the other pieces there, and that's where some of the complexity come in. But as I'll show you in a little bit, there's some really graphical, there's some great graphical user interfaces that allow you to do this stuff. So again, distributed source control is the idea is that not everybody, in a single one you would get rid of these and everybody would point to a central location. But with distributed, each person has their own repository. That repository is managed by them individually. They have a lot of flexibility what they need to do. And then they can then check in and move their information back and forth to a central one so that a group of people can work together on that. So very, very powerful. So the idea is you have this one central repository. each person has their own individual repository on their workstation. What's nice is they can be offline when they're doing their local stuff. So the local person is sitting there, they're committing and updating, moving things back and forth and doing stuff. And when they're ready to go, they can then coordinate that with the central repository. And again, what's nice is the source control system will control this process so you won't accidentally step on people, or you'll be notified so that you know what things have been changed. So you get the best of both worlds. You get control, which is a very, i.e. that's why it's in the name, but also what's nice is you get flexibility on how to do that. Now, one thing that source control allows you to do, and I'll show you some examples of this, which is super important, is a concept called branching. So I want to introduce this right now, is that one of the most powerful capabilities that source control gives you, other than making sure that you coordinate between different people, is what's called branching. And if I go back to my example screen here, this is where that becomes important, is that let's say you have a plan and you have a release out there and it's up and running and working greatly. And again, as I stated before, let's say in your plan you have a whole bunch of new features, you start working on those and you start doing that. Then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, we've got a critical bug. And the issue is we don't want to release what our stuff is in here because it's kind of half-baked. It's halfway in the you know, before it's done. It's not been fully tested, vetted, and ready to go. So the last thing you want to do is push that out to your world and have a whole bunch of other problems creep up. What you want to be able to do is take the last release, tweak it, and then send it back out with that one fix that's going there. Well, with alpha especially, is that on your local system you may have already put together and had a whole bunch of changes to files that are there. And so that's the concept of branching. What it allows you to do is this, is that let's say you have version 1 out in the field, and then you're starting to work on, or I'm sorry, let me say you have version 1.1 out in the field, and then you start building a new version. So you create a branch and you start adjusting those files, and then all of a sudden you have that need to go back and make an adjustment here. Well, in source control, you can use the concept of a branch to say, okay, guess what? I need to create a new branch, and that branch is going to be based off that original version, and therefore then changes. And so what will happen in source control, which is really cool, is that source control will kind of manage this groups of files as one entity, this is another one, so it allows you to quickly say, you know what, put this away for a minute, update and put into my local folder the original version 1.1. I'll make some modifications, and then when I'm done, I'll check those back into a version and then get this back out and start working at it. So it allows you to almost kind of sort of have things put to the side and be able to handle that there. And the powerful reason for that is then when you merge it, then what it's going to do is the merge process will take both your hotfix and also take your big new changes and put them together, and be able to then have a system where it's all coordinated and back together again. So branching is a key functional capability of source control that gives you a lot of flexibility for these real-world situations. Plus, you might have 2 or 3 different versions that are underway. You can have different branches with different sets of files, saying this is my one where I'm doing some experiments here. And then what's cool is that if you ever want to, you can just say, I'll throw away that branch. I don't need it all. Or no, I want to bring that branch in there and merge it into it. And again, source control will make sure when you do that merge that it coordinates it. And source control allows you to do things like go back in time. So if you need to go back in time, let's say you've gone back and you already have version 1.3 out there, and for whatever reason you need to go back and look at version 1.1, you can literally kind of put version 1.3 aside, go back and bring back out this version 1.1, use it for a while, and then put it back. So again, lots of flexibilities, very powerful, makes your life easier, especially for those real-world situations. Now, there's a lot of really good source control systems out there. CVS, SVN, Git. The big ones really, Git seems to be the dominant one out there, but I do know a large number of people who are already using SVN and those pieces there. Doesn't matter to Alpha. Any one of those is going to be fine. Just make sure that it's distributed and it uses the modern kind of methodology there. Now, the important thing about that is there's some really great vendors out there, and the neat thing about it is that almost all of them offer free starter kits, meaning you can create a free repository. Again, you don't need to use a vendor. You can download and create a local repository and just do that. You don't have to. But if you want to have someone host a central repository, as I mentioned before, you on your local machine will have a little repository, but up on the cloud will be your central repository. So if you're working with multiple people, you're going to have the Git repository available to interact with them. And in fact, Alpha has developed a central repository that we are starting to upload all of our demos and templates, and we're going to continue to do that so that in the future you'll be able to just basically check out of this central repository to your local system a demonstration or a template or do something like that. So we're actually eating our own dog food in terms of being able to use these pieces here. So there's some great ones out there. You can go just look at it. Bitbucket, which is owned by Atlassian. GitHub's a big one. GitLab is also a big one, and they have a number of different ones. The only thing I'm going to give you a heads up is that when you have a repository in a central location, there are things called public repositories and private repositories. Public means if I put my stuff up there, then other people can find that repository, and it's like a shared open source kind of scenario. Private repositories means that it's up there, but you have to have a login and security to access that repository. So obviously, often what it is, they give you a few like private ones, but if you need more private ones, then they start charging you. So just you'll see the term public and private repositories. Just know the difference is if it's public, it's going to be open. People are going to be able to access it. If it's private, you're able to do that. But again, all of these people offer usually starter plans where you can get a couple free things to get started, and then as you grow, you can use their systems and services here. One thing that's nice also about this is that if you are working with your end clients, it's a great way of being able to have a central location to check in your code and have it available to the client. So not only within your team, but there's some other cool features to say, hey, you know, let's say I have a client internally, it'll make your life easier in terms of coordinating with a client, meaning you can be doing all the primary development, check it in, and maybe they're in there adjusting some of the HTML or the CSS or something else like that. Really nice for coordinating from there. Okay. So, and then there are also some really good graphic or GUIs, graphical user interfaces. Source control in and of itself is a command line, and therefore you can go through and do command line kind of operations, and you can literally bring up the Windows command line and create repositories, check things in and out. But that often, for most people, especially folks who have been using Alpha that are very familiar and used to a graphical interface, there are third-party ones out there. In fact, I found another one called GitKraken, which is pretty cool, that you can download. And a number of them are free, like SourceTree. GitKraken has free ones, but then there's paid ones that are available. And I'm going to show you one of those in a few moments. But I highly recommend when you're starting with, I find, personally, this is how I started. I didn't start with command line. I started with one of these GUIs and started using it with the GUI just because it made it visual to me of what I was doing and allowed it to do things a little easier from that standpoint there. Now, very important, Alpha Anywhere is very source control friendly. The development team has actually been enhancing and improving Alpha Anywhere to better support source control. Specifically that we're file-based. Recent changes allow like the dates and times to be proper so that source control looks at the dates and times of files to determine when things have changed, when's the last version of it. We had some changes recently that make it just a little nicer and easier for source control to be able to handle it there. And also, so, the other, which is really exciting, is that Alpha actually has a future plan to include version control in the Alpha Anywhere IDE, so you can actually not even have to have a third-party tool to be able to check data in and out of source control and manage it from there. And also, Sarah, I was talking with Sarah about this earlier today, which is very cool, is the ability to save components as JSON representation. And I'll come back to that in a moment. One of the cool things about that now is that since before Alpha, for each one of these files here, the component file, etc., this used to be always what's called a binary file. So literally it really wasn't human readable. It was compiled into a binary format that Alpha could understand, read, and write, and the other pieces there. Well, a recent addition to Alpha is that it can actually save these files now as JSON representation instead of binary. And the thing that opens up is the ability for you to compare two files using a DIF program to see what's changed, so you don't necessarily need to open up an Alpha. And that's really been asked for by a lot of people, and the nice thing about that is you can use a DIF program and say, oh yeah, it looks like this person changed this control or made modifications to these parameters and pieces like that. It helps you in terms of determining what things are changed without necessarily having to launch Alpha, launch both of them, look at them, and understand the pieces there. So it goes from that standpoint there. So we're a file-based system. We have better handling of file changes, the dates and times, so it behaves nicer with source control. And we now support things in JSON so that you can use file diff. And we are, again, planning in the future of being able to allow you to actually use version control in the IDE itself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and do a demonstration. Again, I see some questions coming in. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Let's go here. The QA requirement this from that. Okay. And oh yeah, great. So I've kind of reviewed all the questions. I'm not skipping anybody. I'll come back to that after we finish the demonstration. But Vaughn also told us Tortoise Git. It's called Tortoise Git is another good choice that's out there. So I didn't have their name on here. Let's see, systems, so we can just put it in there. Tortoise Git is another one that's kind of nice. And nice thing is they're all based on certain standards. There's Git or there, whatever you want. Enjoy it and pick the one that you feel comfortable. Now, as I mentioned before, there are some incredible graphical user interfaces. So one I use heavily is something called SourceTree. And again, it's free from, let's go ahead and type this in, from Atlassian, which is a monster company that helps provide, issue tracking and other things like that. It's available for both Mac and Windows, and they have a nicer, beautiful version. I kind of use an older one here. But what it allows you to do is manage your source control as a concept of visually versus having to do command lines. So this is what it looks like. You can have multiple repositories. So here are my different repositories on the left side for the different projects that I'm working for. And then I can open them up and have them in a tabbed interface right here. As I open them up, it's right here. So I can have multiple. Because, hey, most of our developers out there are handling multiple clients, building multiple solutions, helping people out. So they're not just limited to a single one from there. So the idea behind that is that there's a concept of a log, or what's called the history of what's going on here. So as you can see, the core concept between with any source control system is the concept of checking your items into source control. And so that's something called a commit. So you'll see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 commits. These are 4 things that I pushed into my source control. So if I look at it from a visual standpoint, is that I was working on it here and then I committed it into my repository, and therefore when each time I commit into a repository, the repository creates kind of like a checkpoint saying, okay, yeah, here you go. And when you commit something into the repository, you can give it a description of what is the concept or what has been checked in there. So you can give a idea of why you check these things in there. And you'll notice as I click through, here are the different files, and you can see this one has a ton of files. Here one really only had a grid. That's what was checked in for this one. Here, I changed a bunch of grids, modified it, here's a new file, I changed these here, I delivered. So what's nice is you have a very high level of granularity in terms of being able to see what happens to it as it goes checked in. And as you get more sophisticated, you'll notice in here, you can see there's a lot of history on my project going back to the initial check-in of content into here. Then you'll see here I created a branch where I took the files here and created a separate little area, And then in each of these areas here, I kind of made modifications, and then I merged them back into the central location, and then I was back on one. So the cool thing is that the visual representation by the source control tool will kind of show you when branches occur, and I can go through each one, what I did. Like on this branch right here, I was making some changes here on this grid. I made some modifications here, and then I checked them back in here, and these are all the items that got checked back in. And then, oh, I went in here and did some more things, checked it out, so you can get a history of it from there. Now, the other powerful thing about this is you can say, you'll notice here that I have a hollow area. So this means, okay, here are the items that are in my folder that I have modified but have not been committed. So this is the last official thing in my repository. So I have that last official piece here. But here are all my current files that are ready to go. And when I'm ready to go, I can do what's called a stage, where I mark the files I'm ready to commit in there. And then once I stage it, I do what's called a commit, which will then ask me for a description, and then it will update my my repository and make that the head of my location here. Now, very important, I can't really show you here because I don't want to mess with any of my live stuff here, but when you go to do that, the system will go into the repository and say, okay, you're taking these files and you're going to check them into and create and make that the update. Well, wait. It's going to check some stuff and say, for instance, oh, you know what, let's say you changed invoice.a report. So this is a report file there. Let's say someone else was working on that report, and there's already a version of this report that is newer that is in the repository. So this is the idea of, okay, I'm here doing my stuff, you're here doing your stuff. This person might have changed that report and pushed it into our central repository. They were able to do that because nobody had changed that. But now I went in and made a change to the same file, and I go to make a commit. It's going to say, I'm sorry about that, but someone else has checked something in more new than you. We don't want you to overwrite that or make that decision. So that's all going to be handled for you and told you, and then you can then take a few options, and the source control gives you the option. First, it can say, okay, download that other one that's changed and then make some changes to it and then upload it back in to where you want to go. So it prevents people from overwriting each other. But also, when you do that, you can do some cool tricks. You can do things like, for instance, to let's see, let me find a good one here. You can, what's called stash, like, okay, so I've got this button up here called stash, and I'm not going to spend much more time on there, but I want to explain some of the concepts. So let's say I have a situation where I've made a modification to this, there's a newer one in a repository. Well, what I can do is I can stash this file off to the side, pull down the one from the version, make my modifications, and then restore the one I stashed. So version control has these cool little features that when you get into those kind of situations, you can sit down and kind of put files aside, make the modifications, and update them from there. And again, the graphical interface really makes your life easier because it gives you visual representations of what's being changed, who's changed it, when it changed, and those kind of situations there. And then also what will happen is that you'll notice that for text files like this, you'll notice over here to the right that I can see that's the text file that's going to be in there. Let me go to an old one here. That's a grid. Let's see if I can find an A5W page. Okay, so the other thing that's kind of cool about the graphical user interface is when I select on a file, if it can detect the difference between the two files, it will show you. So this is that concept of a DIF. So it can show me what has been deleted and what's been added in that particular file. So you can see the differences between what's already in the repository. So what it's doing is it's comparing what's in the repository with your local file and saying, hey, this is the differences between them. And now that we support JSON, you can actually see that right there to say, oh, you know what, I want my stuff, I want to go ahead and overwrite it. And that's another key powerful thing, is that if you happen to go ahead and overwrite the commit and you go, oh no, I didn't want to do that, what you can do is you can reverse commits, and it will track it, so you have a history of it. You can pull things back out and say, oh, you know, I didn't really want to put that code in there. You could reverse it, pull it back out, still work on it, and then recheck it in later. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I pushed it all over my central files. How do I recover that? they have a whole bunch of capabilities built into it from that standpoint here. And as you get into it, you'll learn more and more about how to use that. So that's just a quick example of what would be a graphical user interface that's available. Where did I go here? So I'm going to go ahead, and we've got a number of questions, so I want to get through those. So I'm going to that's the extent of what my demonstration is here. Again, I highly recommend, if you're starting out, use a graphical user interface. There's a ton of training, examples, videos. In fact, some of the people out there, and I'm going to go ahead and show one right here. If I go to Git, I think it's GitLab. If you're just learning this, there's some excellent I think it's in the community section. There's some great training up there that's available on some of these pieces here, and it allows you to learn. Oh, I think it's Tower. Let me go ahead and Tower Git. I thought there was Git. Let's see if it's here. Yeah, this is another client that's available for Mac and Windows. But I found they have a learning section in here that is just awesome. And it goes through, and they have ebooks and video. It's all free. And and in fact, they have an email course. And basically, it talks about what is version control, what is Git, how does it work, and then it goes through these really cool videos showing you exactly how to do things like branching and stashing and other pieces like that. And that was on Git Tower. Well worth it when you start out to go ahead and watch some of that. It's very well structured, and you'll learn a lot of it from that standpoint there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put a pause. Again, if you have any questions, put them into the questions area. I'm going to do a quick view there and go through the pieces and see if there's any good questions to answer. And again, I'm going to go through the ones that are involved with source control now, but then what I'm going to do is go through any other questions that have the ability to go through there. Or I'm sorry, go through some of the questions that aren't happened there. Okay, TortoiseGit, we covered that. Thank you, Vaughn. Again, TortoiseGit is another one, Subversion, lots of really good ones on there. You just pick one. I just see, my personal is that Git seems to be the big dog nowadays. There's tons of training and support and understanding, a lot of graphical user interfaces. Some are free, like the one I like, the reason I like SourceTree is it's free and it works really well. But some of the others that are even more powerful, they charge a little bit, but it's really a small price to pay. Ben had a question. Yes, we are planning source control integration using Git. That's on the roadmap. By the way, at our upcoming DevCon, they're going to be, Selwyn is going to be going through and doing a presentation on the future roadmap for Alpha. So if you don't have your tickets, you're going to find out lots more about that, and that's only a few weeks away, so we'll get a better feel on that when that's available. So Ben, thank you very much there. Okay, good question. Glenn Child, thank you, Glenn. I'm sorry, I can use last names. Glenn, thank you very much. There was a question about how can ADB and ALM files be version controlled? And the answer is yes, they can, but they are still binary files. So let me talk a little bit about that. I'm going into, and if you just click your little folder icon when you're at the Web Projects Control Panel, it'll open up your folder. So you're going to see in here that these are all the files that make up my application. Actually, I'm at this level right here. Okay, so there's a bunch of other files in here, but the most important files on here is, and I apologize, okay, demonstration, ADB. There's ALB, and then I think, oh, let's go by type. There's ALB, CDX, let's see, ADB file. Where's my ADB file? There it is right here. This is an ADB file. These are binaries, and you can check them in. The only thing I've found is that there's a whole bunch of kind of pre-made like information so that like when you have two different environments, it set up those two environments, and that can be a little programmatically. So one thing I would suggest is that sometimes you can either set up your repository at the top level, thus checking in and out your ADB and ALM files from there. The other opportunity is that you could set up the project and then only do the actual stuff in the web project, where all of these files exist. And I find for most projects, the reality is this is where you're doing all your changes. You're really not doing things at a top level basis. It's all managed at this level here. So I've seen two methods. One where version control is managed at the top level, and you can check in things like the ALB, ADB, etc. The other method is you can actually go in and set up your version tracking within the web project, and in there you're only focused on bringing in components and reports and class files and other things like that that are associated with it. So they can be controlled, and Git will just look at whenever that's changed, it's going to check in a new version of the ADB, ALM. It's just you're not going to be able to see what the changes are. It's just going to say, oh, the date on this file has changed on XYZ date, and from there. And that's part of what we're doing when we're talking about integrating into version control. We're going through the nuances of, well, what really needs to be in version control. For instance, the other thing that, and I didn't go into detail, is you'll notice that there's these other files in here. And it's called a compile, this is a grid, and a manifest. These are kind of temporary files. They're actually never put up on a server or used. They're just used by the development system. And what's nice is in version control, you can actually say, ignore anything that has this kind of ending, like if it's one of these type of files here. So the nice thing is you don't get all the secondary files being put into version control. You really just want your components, your reports, your A5 reports, your class libraries and things like that checked into version control. And that can be handled by version control now. So what's going on is the team's analyzing how best to integrate the developer's interface so that you could have a button up here that says check in, check out, and therefore you don't even have to go to an external and it would handle that. But you have to handle all the situations and the branching and merging and things like that. So it's go there. So great question, Glenn. Again, you can check in ADB and ALM files. Again, what will happen though is that someone else checks it out, they're going to check out and that's going to include those files, and so you have to make sure the environments are set up pretty similar so there doesn't become a problem that's associated with that. Okay. The answer is, can you create folders and subfolders in Git? Absolutely. So what Git is doing is that when Git creates a repository, and I can't show it here, but if I were to show the invisible files, you would see there's a file in a folder called Git. So basically, Git is holding their information here. I can't see it here. But you'll notice that in here I have subfolders with CSS and bin. So if I create a new folder here at the same location of my repository, Git will say, oh, guess what, there's a new folder, and it will track that folder information and the files that are in those folders. So basically you just add those new folders into the folder that's being watched by Git, and it will automatically start managing that. And then when you go into here, if you've done that, you'll start seeing in your uncommitted changes the folders, the files that are in those subfolders, and then you stage them, and when it stages them, it understands that it's in a folder. So if I pull it down on another machine, it's going to actually create that subfolder and then put those files into it. So it handles all that automatically for you. So great question, Vaughn. Oh, is there right now? Oh, let me go back to that. Oh, good question. Okay. How do you put your alpha project into SourceTree for the first time? So the idea behind it is it's pretty straightforward. Is that, so let's say I'm developing a project here, and I'll go back, and you'll notice I have all my different alpha, these are my different projects for the different like training courses, for things I was doing with Alpha Launch, other sub-projects, etc. Okay, so I've got a folder in here, and this is where all my information is. So when I'm ready to go, and I want to create a new repository, what I can do is this. Let's say I want to go into Alpha Cloud 2 and create a repository here, which doesn't exist. So now in SourceTree, I can say New, and this is kind of one of the nice things that's handled by here. I can create so I could clone a repository from a location. I could add a working copy, meaning a repository exists somewhere else and I want to make a new local repository, or I can create a new repository. So I tell it what kind. Now SourceTree supports both Git and Mercurial. I tell it what path, so I'm going to go find my path here, my Alpha Cloud 2 path. Okay, now I can give it a name, whatever it has to be, and then I can say create. So what's going on now is that, and I appreciate you asking it, so what's going on now is it has created a repository. Now if I go back here and do a refresh, you're not going to see anything because it's hidden inside here. And so inside here is hidden files to Windows, but all this information now is in there. So you'll notice that when I created this repository, I've got my new repository in here. You'll notice that there is a series, so it looked at all the files, and notice the folder structure. So it understands that, oh yeah, in here in this default web project folder, here are the settings. So it understands all that. It's there. And you'll also notice that everything here is question marked, meaning that I've got my question marks to it. So I'm going to go ahead and say initial commit. So it's already created the repository, but I don't have anything inside there. So it's comparing it and saying, hey, guess what? I have all these. So the first thing I'm going to do is what's called staging, which means I'm going to grab these files and I'm going to say, I'm going to tell it I want to put all these, because you may not want to put all your files into a repository at one time. Let's say you have 3 files and one file is like one you want to check in, the other 2 you're still working on. Well, you're not forced to check in all your changes. So I'm going to say stage all. So now you'll see up here that it's saying, okay, I've taken all these new files that I've detected, and you'll notice that it has a little plus. And what that plus says is that this file does not exist in the repository. So now what I'm going to do is add that to it. And so I'm going to go ahead and say initial commit. So now that I've got my thing staged, I've told it what I want to commit, I can go down here and put a message in here, and then I click commit. And in a moment, you'll see that it went really fast. But now I've got my new branch, and you'll see here's my branch right here. This gives me my history of it, shows what happened during that commit, and now I'm off to the races here. Now if I go up here, so that's kind of my history view here, and I only have one button here. But now if I go to working copy and I'm sitting there and I go, oh, there's nothing in there. Well, let's go ahead. Let's go into, let me go ahead and just do a demonstration while we're at it. Great question. Let me go ahead and open up my Alpha here. So I'll go into Alpha. I'm working on this. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I'm going into the Alpha environment. So I'm going to do 2 things. One is I want to create a new A5W page. So I'm going to create a new A5W page, and I'm just going to call this Howdy. Okay, I'm going to save this as howdy.h. So everything's normal. I'm just doing my day-to-day work. I'm doing all these things from there. Now I'm going to go back into SourceTree and check this out. You'll notice that in my unstaged area for my working copy, you'll see that, oh, hey, look at this. I've detected a new file called howdy.a5w. And it's got a question mark, meaning that I've never seen it before. I don't know what to do. But check this out, is that behind the scenes, and this was the idea of what we were talking about earlier, is that there are other files in here, the history file that gives a history of what I did. These are alpha ones. You'll see that in here is a little thing saying they're modified. So it saw that I created this new file and I modified these. So I can sit there and I say, okay, great, I want to stage them all. So now it's going to say it's going to just modify these people, and I've got there. So I'm going to go in here and go, let's go ahead and say howdy page added, okay? And I say commit. So basically I've staged my changes. I'm now going to commit it, and I'm going to say commit. Okay, now my working copy is back to blank, but if I go to master, you'll see here's my initial commit, and here is my master, which has that, and it shows me historically what did it. So now I have a history. Now I can go back in here and I say, okay, howdy class, have fun, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I've made a modification here. Oh, well, check it out. I'm going to go to my uncommitted changes. You'll see if I go to my working copy. Notice since I only changed one file, it's got this. So it's saying, oh, wait, I see your howdy A5W page has changed. Here it's modified. And I'll go added. And so I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I want to stage that, get it ready to go. And then I'm going to say made some changes to howdy.a5w. And I could be more verbose, explain what's going on. One thing people do is when they start using issue tracking like Jira or Sembla, they'll actually put in here, you know, issue number 5. And therefore then I know the reason I checked this in was to fix that issue there. So I'll go ahead and commit it. Now if I go to my branches, you'll see I'm up here on this one here. And then I'm going to go back in and make one more change. Here is some more text. Okay, so I'm going to click Save, go back into Source Control. Now notice I'm doing one thing at a time, but I could be changing 4 or 5 files at a time. Stage it. I'm going to say make some changes. Okay, and I'll say commit. Okay, so go back into here, and this is it. Now notice my text here. Howdy class, have fun. Here's some more text. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Okay, so if I go in here and look at howdy, that's what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now I'm going to go back into Source Control. And I'm going to go to my working copy, no changes. I'm going to go to my master, and I'll go, you know what? I shouldn't have made these changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say reverse commit. Okay. It says, do you want to do that? And say yes. You now have merge comment. They need to be resolved. So this is basically saying that when I roll it back, it's detecting that there was a difference there. So you'll see that the unstaged files in there, I'll stage all, and I'm going to go ahead and we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and commit those. I'll say rolling back my changes. Okay, and notice it gave me an opportunity to check that, so I'll commit that. Okay, so let's look at this. There, now my changes are back, and it's telling me what is rolled back. Now if I go into alpha and I open up howdy, you'll notice that, oh, what's happened here? Oh, I must have done something there. I'll have to go check on this, something there. What would happen normally, and sorry, it's a demo, but then you would see that it would roll back the changes. So I guess I didn't recommit those properly, and I apologize. That doesn't make for such a great looking demo right there. Let's go ahead and reverse that commit. Okay, so I didn't like that. I'll go ahead and change this out here. Okay, let me go back in here. Okay, and let me go ahead and reverse that commit. Okay, and I'm hopefully not confusing things here. So let's go back in here and look at this real quick. No, I'm not doing it right. I apologize. So much for a live demo, everybody. But what would happen is that if I did it correctly, which I apologize I did not, what would happen is that it pulls those changes back out of the repository, makes them local. But here's an important concept. Everything you do is tracked. So therefore, if you ever make a mistake, like which I obviously have done here, I haven't destroyed everything. My changes are in there. They're in the repository. I just have to do them the correct process in terms of doing it. And I apologize I didn't. So much for really powerful. And so what it allows you to do is that you can quickly manage your projects so that as you go through, you don't have to manually handle these things. I can roll back and it will have my changes to where they were before. So let's give that a try. Let's go ahead and make a modification of this real quick. Okay. Okay, let's change this here. Let's go ahead and save that. Okay, let me go back, go ahead and close this. Let me see how I do this properly. Okay, I'll go to my working copy. I'll go, let's make it really work. Okay, so I'll go ahead and stage that. Notice it's telling me what I changed, so I'll stage that. I'll commit it. Okay, now I'll go back to my branches here, and I'll go, you know what, I'm going to reverse that commit. No, I want to reverse it. I think that was where I'm getting used to this, but you can basically reverse this commit and it will take you back to where it is, and then when you reload it open. The idea is they want you to kind of track every time you change it. So let's give this a try. Let's give that one more try and see if that will work. And see there. Let's reverse commit. Yes. Okay. And let's go ahead and open this up. Okay, yeah, no, doesn't have that in there. And, well, actually it does. It put it back to where it had these items here. So I reversed that commit, so it brought back this kind of junk things in there. Well, I apologize, but that's the concept, is that as you check these things in, you can reverse them, you can map them back. I could create a branch right here, and what it does is it basically makes a copy of everything, allows me to change that copy and then merge the changes back in, all that. And it's much easier to handle in here, like doing merging and other things. Rebasing means bring it back to what is in the repository from there. So long-winded question, but let me go ahead and bring this down here and go back to the questions. We've got about 5 minutes, so I want to get through a few other ones. Oh, good question. If you there's a question by Roger. If you look at the before and after the changes in the AI and the Git system, if you save them as JSON, and that was one of the key concepts. If you don't, otherwise you'll just see the date changes. With JSON, you can actually see the differences, and it gives you a feel for the changes between them. Does the repository table? You know what? Pat has a great question. Does it hold table changes? And the answer should be yes, because if I look in here, you'll notice here in my files, let's go ahead and look at that real quick. And I only have a few minutes, but let me go back in here. Let me go to my control panel. Let me create a new table. Hello. Okay. Yeah, we'll call that test. Save it. Okay, so now I've saved that table. If I go to my directory, you'll notice I have my test changes here. Okay, now if I go into my repository, go to my working copy, check this out. I can say created new tables. I'll stage them, and then I will commit it, and now those tables. So yes, it's going to take whatever the current state of these tables are, check them in so I could roll them back if I wanted to. So if I went in and made changes to that table structure and this structure, so you know, and now the one thing you may want to do is that maybe you don't want that to occur. So we can actually go in and you can say, let's go ahead and you can go into the different files here and you can do things like, let's see, now let's go ahead. In here you can say what's called ignore. So let me do a real quick change. Let's go ahead and make a modification there, test, okay, save, okay. So I go back into my repository, go to working copy. Okay, here's my changes here. Well, you'll notice that it changed all these things because I changed it. I can actually go in here and I can say stop tracking. Or I can say discard. So discard would say just throw away what I did. Like if I just want to get rid of it. I can also do something called stop tracking, which means don't watch this file anymore because you may not want to watch those files, certain files in it. So this gives you the ability to kind of tune up your source control so that only the files you want to go in are being in there. So great question, Pat. Text changes, okay. So only use A5W reports. Glenn was saying about the changes. Yeah, that does help out from there like that. Oh yeah, Ben, great question. Ben made a note. And guys, thank you for all your questions. We're probably a little more efficient with someone else watching it, so I'm just kind of catching up. But Ben had a suggestion of talking about the JSON format. Let's take that as for next week. I'll do a recap on that, show you a little bit more detail. I just don't have enough time here, and I want to get through a couple other questions. But Ben, that is a great question about talking about how it saves in JSON. What do you look like? What does it look like from that standpoint? So there. Oh, Vaughn has a question about temp files, saving them into a different folder. You'll notice in here that if I go in here, there's a whole bunch of temp files that are in here. Where are those? Oh, I don't have any grids. These are all A5W files. But there are like temp files here. And yeah, it'd be nice if it, and that may be what they're working on in terms of making things source control. But it's really easy. When you're in source control, you can go into here and just say stop tracking. And you can actually even say, for instance, it will say it's going to be removed from version control but remain on your disk. The other thing you can do is what's called a ignore. And what the ignore does is say, okay, anything with a .ddd, ignore. Anything with a .ddm, ignore. So it allows you to say, okay, just ignore these different files that are associated with that. So cool. Oh, good question. Can you do DIFs on UI files? This is from Kat. Great question, Kat. The answer is yes, if you save your files as JSON representation. So let me go back here. Let's go ahead and go back into Alpha. Let's go to here. I don't know if I saved it. Let's see. So Okay, check this out. Oh, that was a A5W file. That was cheating. So like for instance, A5W files, meaning web pages, it's easy to do diff. But let's see, where's my component here? Let me go find a better grid component real quick. And we'll go right here. Okay, so this is a UX component. That's again why I put the UX there. I'm going to go ahead and edit in Notepad and check it out. Notice how it's been saved here. This is called JSON. So this is a JSON definition. So everything in here is text. And it's quite extensive. I mean, you'll see that it's got a lot of stuff. You'll see that it's talking about, here's a dialog form control. This is how it's displayed. So this isn't, but what you can do is you can compare this to another file using diff, and you can actually visually see what's changed. So the answer is you can do diffs both on you know, code files, but also now you can do it on UXs and grids that will be able to show from that there. How do you open a project alpha? We may have to do a follow-on and do more work on it. Jameson, great question. I don't have time to go over that. We're at the end of our time. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and record all of these questions here, and after they've been recorded, I will cover them next week because I think this has provoked a lot of great conversation. I've not seen this many questions, so I want to say thank you very much for everybody. Awesome questions. I'm going to go ahead and record all these questions. I'll look through them. We'll be prepared to talk about them next week. We are at the end of our time. I appreciate your flexibility on letting me do this solo. Usually I have Dave helping me out. And again, I want to say thank you for all of your great questions. If you haven't signed up, get to DevCon. We've got a lot of good things. We'll be talking about the future roadmap. And have a great week. We really appreciate it. Keep you up the awesome work. We'll convene next week, and when we do, I'm going to go over these questions first and foremost, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, and take care.